She stayed overnight in a boys' hostel for shelter. What happened next left everyone stunned. The night was so quiet, every sound seemed to pierce the stillness. Clara Bennett's laughter from her friend's birthday party had faded, leaving a hollow echo in her mind. Now, driving alone through Manchester's nearly deserted streets, she wished the celebration had wrapped up hours ago. The rain began as a gentle tapping against her windshield, then intensified into a driving downpour that smeared the road ahead. She hunched over the wheel, knuckles white, straining to see through the fogged glass. Then came the sputter, a sharp lurch and a chilling quiet. Her car coughed, dashboard lights flickered. Then the engine died completely. She twisted the key again and again until her fingers ached, but only the hollow click of defeat answered. "Not now," she muttered, glancing nervously at her phone. Its screen mocked her. No signal. Hugging her coat tighter, Clara stepped out. Cold rain stung her cheeks as she scanned the deserted street. It was late, the road stretched empty, lined only with shadowed buildings and a few dim street lamps. A faint sound carried on the wind, footsteps. At first, she dismissed it as nerves, but then they came again, a steady, unhurried rhythm, unmistakably drawing closer. She picked up her pace, puddles splashing beneath her shoes. The footsteps quickened right along with her. Her heart hammered. Clara glanced over her shoulder. Two men, dark silhouettes under a distant street lamp, were walking steadily behind her. Not close enough to grab her, but close enough to twist her stomach into knots. "Don't panic," she told herself. "Just keep moving." She clutched her small handbag tighter, forcing her legs to move faster. The street ahead seemed endless. Every store was dark, every house silent. The rain muffled her ragged breaths, her hands trembling as she desperately searched for any sign of life, any place to hide. Then she saw it. A tall brick building with lights glowing faintly through narrow windows. A slightly tilted sign read, "Riverside Boys Hostel." Clara hesitated for only a moment. A boys' hostel was the absolute last place she wanted to be, especially at this hour, but the persistent footsteps behind her drowned out all hesitation. She hurried across the street, nearly slipping on the wet pavement, and pushed open the heavy iron gate. A small guard's cabin stood near the entrance, a single yellow bulb flickering weakly inside. A middle-aged man in a dark blue uniform hunched over a kettle, steam coiling into the damp air. Clara banged on the door. "Please help me. Can I just stay here for a little while?" Her voice cracked, breathless with fear. The man looked up, startled. His worn face softened at the sight of her drenched, desperate state. He stepped forward, cautious but concerned. "This is a boys' hostel, miss. No outsiders are allowed," he said. "What happened?" Clara's eyes darted to the street behind her, where the two men still lingered near the gate, pretending conversation but clearly watching. "Please," she whispered urgently. "My car broke down. Those men have been following me. I just need somewhere safe for the night." The man studied her for a long second. His gut told him this was trouble. But a deeper instinct, one that bypassed rules and appealed directly to his humanity, urged him to act. He opened the door wider. "Come in quickly before anyone sees." Relief flooded Clara's chest as she stepped into the tiny warm cabin. The rain pounded outside, but for the first time that night, she felt a flicker of safety. She had no idea that this decision, this act of kindness from a stranger, was about to change not only her life, but his as well. The security cabin was hardly more than a box, barely large enough for a desk, a chair, and a small electric heater humming in the corner. Yet to Clara, it felt like a sanctuary compared to the frigid street outside. The man who had let her in quickly shut the door, his eyes flicking once more to the figures at the gate before drawing the thin curtain across the small window. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady but kind. "Name's Edward Harris. I keep watch at night. Don't worry, they won't bother you while you're inside." Clara nodded, her throat tight. Her expensive dress clung damply to her skin, and water dripped from her hair onto the worn floorboards. She hugged herself, shivering. Edward noticed and rummaged in a cupboard until he pulled out an old but clean gray blanket. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair while he plugged in the kettle. "You look half frozen. Tea will warm you." Clara sank into the chair, wrapping the blanket around herself. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such unassuming kindness. People usually saw her as Richard Bennett's daughter first, and Clara second. Edward, she could tell, had no idea who she was, and strangely that made her feel freer. He handed her a steaming mug of tea. "So," he said gently, settling into his chair opposite her. "Want to tell me what happened? It's not every night someone like you knocks on a security guard's door." Clara hesitated, eyes on the rising steam. She didn't want to reveal her surname or her family background. "I was coming back from a friend's birthday party," she said finally. "Car broke down, phone wouldn't work. I tried walking, then realized 2 men were following me. When I saw this place, I just ran." Edward's eyes softened. "Good instincts. You did the right thing." Silence settled between them, broken only by the rain drumming on the tin roof. Clara studied him discreetly. His uniform was neatly pressed despite its age, and his lined face carried a quiet dignity. He looked like a man who had seen more than his share of long nights. "Do you always work nights?" she asked, partly to fill the silence. Edward gave a small smile. "For years now. Pays the bills just barely, but I can't complain. Honest work keeps me going. I have a daughter, Emily. Smart as a whip, wants to be a doctor." His expression grew wistful. "She studies harder than anyone I know. But medical school's not cheap. I try to save every penny, but well, sometimes it feels like chasing the horizon." Clara tilted her head. "She wants to be a doctor? That's wonderful." "Her dream, not mine," Edward said, pride warming his voice. "I told her, even if I have to work 3 jobs, I'll get her there. But truth is, security guard wages don't stretch far. She's already talking about giving it up, saying she doesn't want me breaking my back for her." He shook his head, staring into his tea. "She doesn't realize seeing her dream come true would be the only reward I'd ever need." Clara's chest tightened. She thought of her own father, who measured everything in terms of profits and business deals. She couldn't imagine him sacrificing like this for her dreams. For the first time in years, she felt envy, not of wealth but of Emily, who had a father who cared so deeply. "Emily's lucky to have you," Clara whispered. Edward chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sometimes she wouldn't agree with you, but I try." They sat for a while longer, sipping tea while the storm raged outside. For Clara it felt surreal, sharing a tiny cabin with a stranger, wrapped in an old blanket, listening to stories of dreams and sacrifices. Yet somehow, in the warmth of Edward's words, she felt more at home than she had in her own mansion for years. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the streets slick with rainwater and the air sharp with the smell of wet pavement. Inside the small cabin, Clara stirred beneath the scratchy blanket. Her eyes blinked open to find the weak gray light of morning filtering through the curtain. Edward was already awake, scribbling something into a worn notebook. When he noticed her movement, he gave a polite nod. "Morning. The worst of the rain's gone. I'll walk you out in a bit so no one sees." Clara sat up, clutching the blanket tightly. A strange mix of gratitude and unease filled her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For last night. You don't know what I'd have done otherwise." Edward smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. I only did what any man with a conscience should do. But fate rarely rewards kindness so neatly." As Clara prepared to slip out, the crunch of footsteps came outside. 2 hostel boys, both carrying footballs under their arms, stopped abruptly when they spotted her stepping from the cabin door. Their eyes widened, then narrowed, and a knowing grin spread across one of their faces. "Oi, Tom," one whispered loudly enough for Clara to hear. "You see what I see? A girl in the guard's cabin." The other snorted. "Blimey, Edward's got secrets." Clara's cheeks burned crimson. Edward's face tightened. "Go on, lads. Back inside," he ordered firmly. But it was too late. The rumor had already taken root. By the time Clara slipped out through the side gate, whispers were rippling through the corridors of Riverside Boys' Hostel. By breakfast, half the hostel was buzzing with speculation. Who was the girl? Why was she there all night? Edward didn't have to wait long before the inevitable came. At mid-morning, the heavy-set figure of Mr. Collins, the hostel warden, marched across the courtyard with a scowl etched into his face. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the stones as he stormed into the security cabin without knocking. "Edward Harris." His voice boomed like a gavel. "I've had complaints from the boys. Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't bring a woman into this hostel overnight." Edward rose to his feet slowly, his jaw tight. "Mr. Collins, the young lady was in trouble. Her car broke down and she was being followed. I couldn't just leave her out there in the storm." Collins's expression twisted into disdain. "Excuses. You know the rules. No outsiders, especially not women. You've brought scandal onto this institution. Do you realize what the trustees will say if word spreads?" Edward's voice remained calm but firm. "She was frightened. Alone. I couldn't turn her away." "That's not your decision to make," Collins snapped. His jowls quivered with outrage. "You've compromised this hostel's reputation. You're suspended, effective immediately. Clear out your things." Clara wasn't there to hear the words, but Edward felt the weight of them like stones pressing into his chest. 4 years he had kept his head down, worked the long nights without complaint, sacrificed every comfort for the sake of his daughter's future. And now with a single act of mercy it was all crumbling. Still Edward did not argue. He straightened his shoulders and said quietly, "If protecting a young woman's safety costs me my job, then so be it." Collins sneered. "Dignity won't pay your bills, Harris. You've dug your own grave." By evening Edward's few belongings, a thermos, some books and his old jacket, were packed into a small cardboard box. As he walked out of the hostel gates for what he thought was the last time, his heart ached not for himself but for Emily. Every dollar mattered for her tuition. Every shift kept her dream alive. Without this job the horizon seemed to shrink further away. What Edward didn't know was that Clara Bennett, guilt gnawing at her, had watched everything from the shadows across the street. And she wasn't about to forget the price he had paid for his kindness. 3 days passed like shadows. Edward Harris moved through them with the heaviness of a man who had lost not just his job but his sense of purpose. His small flat above a corner shop suddenly felt colder, quieter. Each time his daughter Emily spoke about university applications, he forced a smile, though inside he wondered how he would ever afford even the entry fees now. He was sipping weak tea one gray morning when a crisp envelope slid under his door. On it, in neat handwriting, was his name. Inside lay a single sheet. "Mr. Edward Harris is requested to attend a meeting at Bennett & Company headquarters 11 a.m. tomorrow." Edward frowned. He had no ties to one of the city's largest corporations. Was it a mistake or a cruel joke? Still, something about the formality of the letter nudged him toward hope. The next day, he dressed in his cleanest shirt, tied his old tie carefully, and made the journey to the glittering glass tower that rose like a monument over Manchester. The security guards at the entrance checked the letter, exchanged a brief glance, and then ushered him through. Edward stepped into the sleek lobby, marble floors gleaming, walls lined with abstract art. It was a world he had never entered before, a world of wealth, of power. He felt small, out of place, clutching his worn jacket under his arm. "Mr. Harris," a young assistant asked politely. "This way, please." He followed her into a spacious conference room. The view outside stretched across the whole city. At the far end of the table sat a figure he recognized instantly, though the transformation made his breath catch. Clara, the young woman who had sought shelter in his tiny cabin, was no longer trembling in the rain. She was poised, dressed in a tailored suit, her hair perfectly styled, her confidence unmistakable. "Yes, Mr. Harris," she said softly, rising to greet him. "I owe you an explanation." Edward blinked, still struggling to process. "You're Clara Bennett," she finished for him. "Daughter of Richard Bennett, founder of Bennett & Company." The name hit him like a thunderclap. Everyone in Manchester knew it. The Bennetts weren't just wealthy. They were the kind of family whose decisions shifted markets. Edward stared, stunned, remembering her, huddled in his blanket, sipping tea from his chipped mug. Clara's expression softened. "That night when I told you my car broke down, it was true. But what I didn't say is that the men following me weren't random strangers. They were my father's security detail. He'd sent them to bring me home after I stormed out. We'd fought again. He wants me to marry the son of a business partner. An arrangement to strengthen their companies. I couldn't bear it, so I left the party on my own." Edward's brows drew together. "And you ended up at a boys' hostel?" Clara nodded. "I saw the lights. I was desperate. You didn't know who I was, and yet you gave me shelter." You treated me like a person, not a name, not a fortune. Do you realize how rare that is for me? Edward shook his head slowly. All I did was what any father would do if he saw a girl in danger. Her eyes shimmered. And you paid the price for it. I heard what Mr. Collins did. You lost your job because of me. I can't let that stand. Before Edward could protest, the door opened. A tall man with silver hair entered. The imposing figure of Richard Bennett himself. His gaze was sharp, his suit immaculate. So, he said, studying Edward carefully, you're the guard who sheltered my daughter. Edward rose to his feet, meeting his eyes steadily. Yes, sir. And I'd do it again. Richard Bennett's presence filled the room like a storm cloud. Clara's shoulders stiffened, but Edward stood tall, his weathered hands clasped loosely in front of him. You sheltered my daughter, Richard said, his voice measured but carrying the weight of authority. In a boys' hostel, against the rules of your employment. Tell me why. Edward didn't flinch. Because she was afraid. Because the world can be unkind at night, especially to a young woman walking alone. I didn't think about rules. I thought about what I'd want someone to do if it were my Emily out there. The name seemed to soften something in Clara's expression. Richard's eyes flicked briefly to her, then back to Edward. Emily, my daughter, Edward explained quietly. Smart, hard-working, wants to be a doctor. But, he hesitated, feeling the weight of his honesty. Money's short. She may have to give it up. I wish I could give her the life she deserves, but I can't. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Clara spoke, her voice carrying unexpected steel. Father, this man gave me what none of your money could buy. Safety, compassion, humanity. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't care about my name or your empire. He just cared that I was a girl in trouble. If anyone deserves help, it's him. Richard's gaze lingered on his daughter, surprised by her firmness. Then he turned back to Edward. And what do you want from me, Mr. Harris? Edward shook his head immediately. Nothing. I didn't help Clara for a reward. I helped her because it was the right thing to do. Clara's lips curved into a small smile. Which is why you deserve it all the more. The following week, Edward returned home carrying a folder. Inside was confirmation that Emily Harris's tuition had been covered in full. And not only that, Clara had used her influence with the university board to secure Emily a merit-based scholarship that ensured her path into medical school. When Edward told Emily, she froze, eyes wide. Dad, are you serious? I can really go. Edward nodded, his voice breaking with emotion. It's real, love. You can chase your dream now. No more worrying about bills. Just study. Just be the doctor you've always wanted to be. Emily threw her arms around him, tears streaking her cheeks. I don't know how. I don't know why, but thank you. Edward held her close, thinking silently of Clara. A few days later, Clara visited their modest flat. Emily answered the door, her jaw dropping when she saw the poised young woman from the glossy magazines. Clara only smiled and said, You must be Emily. Your father's told me so much about you. Emily stammered, overwhelmed, but Clara put her at ease with warmth rather than formality. They sat together for hours. Clara listening to Emily's plans for medical school. Emily listening in awe as Clara described her work with charities and education initiatives she'd secretly supported. By the end of the evening, it felt less like two strangers meeting and more like sisters discovering each other. Meanwhile, Richard Bennett requested another meeting with Edward. Unlike before, his tone was less commanding, more curious. You refuse charity, Richard said. You stand on principles. I need men like that. Loyal, steady, incorruptible. I'd like to offer you a position as head of security at Bennett & Company. It's honest work, respectable pay, not a gift but a job. Edward hesitated. I'm not a man used to glass towers and boardrooms. Richard's lips curved faintly. Neither was I once. Consider it. Edward thought of Emily's future, of Clara's trust, and nodded. I'll do it, but I'll earn it like any other man. Clara's eyes glistened with pride. In giving her shelter, Edward had saved Clara's spirit. In return, she had saved his daughter's dream. Spring arrived in Manchester with soft rain showers and blossoms peeking along the streets. Edward Harris walked with a new kind of pride these days, his navy blue suit freshly pressed, his steps purposeful as he entered Bennett and Company each morning. He was no longer the weary night guard at a hostel. Now he stood at the helm of a security team entrusted with protecting one of the city's most powerful companies. But the real source of his pride wasn't the polished office or the respectable salary. It was Emily. Every evening she called from her dormitory at medical school, her voice brimming with energy as she described her classes, her professors, the first time she held a stethoscope. Edward would listen, his chest swelling with joy. For years he had feared her dreams slipping away like sand through his fingers. Now, because of Clara Bennett's gratitude and determination, those dreams had become reality. Clara had changed too. The night she spent in Edward's cabin had stripped away the gilded walls of her privileged world. She visited often, sharing meals with Edward and Emily, laughing in their cramped kitchen as though she had always belonged there. For Clara, the Harris family was a reminder of something money could never buy: authentic love, selfless sacrifice, and belonging. One afternoon, as Edward left the office, he noticed a familiar figure lingering near the reception desk. The man's shoulders hunched, his suit threadbare, his face carrying the sour look of pride swallowed. Edward blinked, hardly believing his eyes. "Mr. Collins?" The former hostel warden looked up sharply, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Harris," his tone was clipped, defensive. "Didn't expect to see you here." Edward raised his brows. "What brings you to Bennett and Company?" Collins cleared his throat, avoiding Edward's steady gaze. "Applied for a security post. Times are just difficult." For a moment memories rushed back. The humiliation, the way Collins had cast Edward aside without hesitation, treating him like a stain on the hostel's reputation. Edward remembered walking away with a cardboard box of belongings, wondering how he would ever provide for Emily. Now here they stood, their roles reversed. Collins waited, fidgeting as though expecting Edward to gloat. But Edward only said quietly, "I see. Well, best of luck with your application." The look on Collins's face was almost comical, but Edward didn't linger. He had no interest in revenge. Life had already written its own lesson. That evening, Edward told Clara about the encounter. She tilted her head, curious. "Did you tell my father?" Edward shook his head. "No need. I'm not here to settle old scores. My daughter's in medical school. That's all that matters." Clara smiled warmly. "That's why Emily is so proud of you." Weeks later, Edward sat in the small audience of a scholarship ceremony at Emily's university. When her name was called, he clapped until his palms stung. Emily walked across the stage, her smile radiant. And in that moment, Edward thought of the stormy night that had brought Clara to his cabin. How close he had been to turning her away. How easily kindness could have been denied. Clara joined him afterward, her elegant dress at odds with the humble folding chairs around them. She squeezed his hand. "You gave me shelter when no one else would, Edward. You changed the course of my life. And now look at Emily. Your kindness created ripples you'll never fully see." Edward's eyes grew misty as he watched his daughter laugh with her new friends. "Funny thing about kindness," he said softly. "It doesn't cost a thing. Yet it pays back more than you ever imagine." The story had come full circle. The security guard who once worried about losing everything had gained far more than he ever dreamed. A daughter's future secured, a bond with a young woman who felt like family, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that in a world too often ruled by power and fear, kindness still had the final say.